The war began long before the first bomb fell. It started in the darkness above 70,000 feet, where the air is so thin that the sky turns black even at noon, where human lungs will collapse in seconds, and where the curvature of the earth becomes undeniable. Up there, in the realm between atmosphere and space, two aircraft had ruled unchallenged for decades, the Lockheed State Route 71 Blackbird and the U-2 Dragon Lady. By 1991, as Operation Desert Storm prepared to reshape the Middle East, these machines had already become legends. The State Route 71, capable of Mach 3.2, faster than a rifle bullet, could cross the entire length of Iraq in under 12 minutes. The U-2, slower but no less deadly, could loiter for hours at altitudes where no interceptor could reach it, capturing photographs so detailed that analysts could read license plates from the edge of space. Baghdad knew they were coming. The question was whether they could do anything about it. Captain Daniel Reaper Kovacs stood in the pre-dawn cold, staring at the U-2S parked under floodlights. The aircraft looked alien, long, slender wings stretching 90 feet, a single-jet engine, and a cockpit so cramped that pilots wore full-pressure suits identical to those used by astronauts. This wasn't just a plane. It was a time capsule from the Cold War, a relic that refused to die because nothing else could do what it did. "You nervous?" asked Major Sarah Chun, the mission intelligence officer, stepping beside him with a tablet glowing in the darkness. "Should I be?" Kovacs replied, his breath misting in the freezing air. "You're about to fly over the most heavily defended airspace on the planet," Chin said flatly. "The Iraqis have SA-2s, SA-3s, SAS roller missiles, and French-made radar systems that were cutting-edge in the 80s. They've been preparing for this since the Iran-Iraq War. If they see you, they'll throw everything they have." Kovacs nodded slowly. He'd flown two missions over the Soviet Union during the final years of the Cold War, dancing along the edge of Soviet airspace, while MiG-31 screamed upward, always falling short. But this was different. Iraq had spent a decade fortifying Baghdad into one of the most integrated air defense networks outside Moscow. French engineers had helped them do it. "What's the profile?" he asked. Chun tapped her tablet, pulling up a digital map of Iraq. Red circles bloomed across the screen like a disease, each one a surface-to-air missile site, each cluster representing overlapping radar coverage. Baghdad sat in the center, surrounded by concentric rings of defenses. You'll enter Iraqi airspace from the west, coming in from Saudi Arabia at 73,000 feet. Your target is the Republican Guard Command bunker outside Baghdad. We need imaging of troop movements, vehicle concentrations, and communications infrastructure. Total exposure time over hostile territory, 90 minutes. 90 minutes, Kovacs repeated. "And if they light me up? Then you're at the mercy of physics," Chin said. "The SA-6 has a ceiling of 59,000 feet. The SA-2 can theoretically reach 70,000, but it's never actually hit anything above 60. You'll be above them. Probably. That's the best we've got." 3,000 miles away, in a windowless conference room deep inside the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, another conversation was unfolding. "The Blackbird is a political problem," said Director of Intelligence Robert Gates, leaning back in his chair. "We retired it in 1990. Officially, it doesn't exist anymore." "Officially," said Colonel Thomas Hargrove, USAF liaison to the intelligence community. "But 3 SR-71s are still operational at Palmdale. We kept them in reserve for exactly the scenario." The room was silent except for the hum of air conditioning. Around a table sat representatives from the NSA, DIA, NRO, and the Pentagon's Joint Staff. On the wall-mounted screen, satellite imagery showed Baghdad's sprawling defenses, radar installations, missile batteries, command bunkers buried under reinforced concrete. "The Iraqis know about the U-2, said an NSA analyst, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. "They've been tracking you, 2 flights along their border for months. They know the profile, the altitude, the sensor suite. But the State Route 71? They haven't seen one in a decade. They have no current doctrine for intercepting it. Because nothing can intercept it," Hargrove said. "The Soviets tried for 30 years. The best they ever did was track it on radar, and watch it disappear over the horizon. The MiG-25 Foxbat was specifically designed to shoot down the Blackbird. It never came close. Gates folded his hands. What's the proposal? We use both, Hargrove said. The U-2 gives us persistent surveillance, long loiter time, high-resolution imaging, signals intelligence collection. The state Route 71 gives us speed and invulnerability. If the Iraqis start adapting to U-2's profile, we hit them with the Blackbird. They won't know what they're looking at until it's already gone. And if something goes wrong, Gates asked, if we lose a pilot? Then we lose a pilot, Hargrove said quietly. But we don't lose the war because we didn't have the intelligence. Colonel Rashid Al-Takridi sat in the dimly lit command center, watching the radar screens with the intensity of a man who knew his life depended on what they showed. Around him, 24 operators monitored consoles displaying overlapping radar coverage of Iraqi airspace. The French-made Thompson CSF systems hummed steadily, their cathode ray displays painting a green picture of the sky. Sector 4 reports increased AWACS activity along the Saudi border, reported a young lieutenant. They're watching us, Rashid muttered, just as we're watching them. The room smelled of cigarette smoke and stale coffee. Everyone knew the Americans were coming. The only question was when. Rashid had spent 3 years in Paris during the 1980s, learning French air defense doctrine, studying NATO tactics, preparing Iraq for exactly this scenario. The Iraqis had built their system carefully. Long-range search radars to detect incoming aircraft, fire control radars to guide missiles, optical tracking systems as backups. They'd position missile batteries in overlapping arcs, ensuring that any aircraft penetrating Baghdad's airspace would face multiple engagement opportunities. But there was a problem that gnawed at him every time he looked at the technical specifications. Altitude, the SA-2 guideline, the backbone of Iraqi air defense, had a maximum effective ceiling of 60,000 feet under ideal conditions. The SA-6 gainful topped out at 59,000 feet. Even the newer SA-3 GOA couldn't reliably engage targets above 65,000 feet. And the Americans had aircraft that flew higher. Colonel, said another operator, we're receiving a contact report from Sector 2. High-altitude radar return. Bearing 270. Altitude estimated 70,000 feet. Speed subsonic. Rashid stood quickly, moving to the operator station. The radar screen showed a faint blip, flickering at the edge of detection. What is it? Rashid demanded. Unknown, sir. Profile is consistent with a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, but it's at the extreme edge of our radar's capability. Rashid watched the blip move slowly across the screen, following a steady course toward Baghdad. His hands tightened on the edge of the console. Can we engage? The operator hesitated. Negative, sir. It's above our missile envelope. Rashid stared at the screen, watching the intruder cross into Iraqi airspace with impunity. Somewhere up there, in the cold darkness above the clouds, an American pilot was photographing his country, mapping its defenses, preparing a way for the destruction that everyone knew was coming. And there was nothing he could do about it. Log the contact, Rashid said quietly, and pray to God that when the war starts, they don't send something faster. Major Richard Viper Callahan stood before the state Route 71 Blackbird, and even after 200 flight hours in the aircraft, it still took his breath away. The jet was pure menace. 107 feet of titanium and classified composites, painted in a heat-resistant black coating that gave the aircraft its nickname. Twin Pratt & Whitney J58 engines, each capable of generating 34,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner. A design so radical that when it first flew in 1964, it looked like something from another century. And in many ways, it was... Final pre-flight briefing in 10 minutes, said Lieutenant Colonel Janet Morse, Mission Commander for Special Reconnaissance Operations. She appeared beside Callahan, carrying a sealed briefing folder marked top secret // decide / no foreign. You ready for this? Define ready, Callahan said, still staring at the aircraft. Morse smiled grimly. You're going to penetrate Iraqi airspace at 85,000 feet and Mach 3.2. You'll be moving so fast that if they fire a missile at you, you'll outrun it. Your thermal signature will be so hot that their infrared systems will think you're a meteor, and you'll cross the entire country in 11 minutes. 11 minutes to photograph everything. Everything that matters, Morse corrected. SIGINT package will be recording every radar mission, every radio transmission, every electronic signature between the Saudi border and the Iranian border. The optical sensors will be capturing continuous high-resolution imagery. By the time you exit Iraqi airspace, we'll know more about their military infrastructure than Saddam does. Callahan nodded slowly. The State Route 71 had been officially retired 18 months earlier, a victim of budget cuts and the belief that satellites had made manned reconnaissance obsolete. But satellites were predictable. They followed fixed orbits. The Iraqis knew when American spy satellites would pass overhead, and they learned to hide their most sensitive assets during those windows. The Blackbird didn't have that problem. It could fly anytime, anywhere, without warning. What's the threat assessment? Callahan asked. Morse opened a folder, revealing satellite photographs of Iraqi air defense installations. The Iraqis have been reinforcing their northern approaches. MiG, 25 Foxbats based at Al-Taqaddam Air Base. Those are the only interceptors in their inventory that can even attempt to reach your altitude. But even the Foxbat tops out at 78,000 feet and can only maintain that altitude for about 90 seconds before the engines flame out. So I'll be above them. You'll be above everything, Morse said. The only real danger is a Lucky Sam shot. The SA-2 has a theoretical ceiling of 75,000 feet, but it's never successfully engaged a target above 62,000. Still, the Iraqis might try. If you see a missile launch, just accelerate. At Mach 3, you're covering a mile every 2 seconds. No surface-to-air missile can match that. Callahan studied the mission profile map. The flight path would take him from a refueling point over Saudi Arabia, straight across western Iraq, over Baghdad, and out to the northern corridor toward Turkey. Total time over hostile territory, 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Less than 12 minutes to change the course of a war. One more thing, Morse said, her voice dropping. If something goes wrong, if you have a flameout, if the aircraft becomes unrecoverable, you eject over Saudi or Turkish airspace. Under no circumstances do you allow yourself to be captured over Iraq. Understood. Callahan understood perfectly. The State Route 71 carried some of the most classified technology in the U.S. military. Its sensors, its defensive systems, its operational parameters, all of it was beyond top secret. If the Iraqis got their hands on the wreckage, or worse, a live pilot with operational knowledge, it would be a strategic disaster. Understood, he said quietly. Colonel Rashid Al-Takriti hadn't slept in 36 hours. The coalition air campaign had begun 3 days earlier, and every night since then, the sky over Baghdad had erupted in fire. F-117 Nighthawks dropping precision bombs, Tomahawk cruise missiles screaming out of the darkness, and waves of F-15s and F-16s striking targets across the city. But those were tactical strikes. Noisy, visible, predictable. What haunted Rashid were the ghosts. Colonel, called out Captain Fard, one of the senior radar operators, we have another anomaly. Sector 3, extreme high altitude. Rashid moved quickly to Fard Station. The radar screen showed a faint contact, barely visible through the electronic noise. Altitude reading fluctuated wildly. 82,000 feet, 85,000 feet, 88,000 feet. That can't be right, Rashid muttered. No aircraft flies at 88,000 feet. I know, sir, Fard said, his voice tense. But the return is real. Speed indicates Mach 2.8 and accelerating. Rashid felt ice water pour down his spine. Mach 2.8. At 85,000 feet, there was only one aircraft in the world capable of that performance profile. Blackbird, he whispered. Around him, the command center went silent. Every operator turned to look at him. They brought back the Blackbird? Someone whispered in disbelief. Rashid stared at the radar screen, watching the impossible contact slice across Iraqi airspace like a meteor. The Americans had told the world that the State Route 71 was retired, mothballed, finished. But here it was, screaming over Baghdad at 3 times the speed of sound, higher than any missile could reach, faster than any interceptor could chase. "Scramble the Fox bats," Rashid ordered, even though he knew it was futile. "Sir, they can't." "I know they can't," Rashid snapped. "But we have to try. We have to show Saddam that we tried." At Al-Taqaddam Air Base, 70 miles west of Baghdad, 2 MiG-25 Foxbats roared down the runway and clawed their way into the night sky. The Foxbat was the Soviet Union's answer to the Blackbird, a brute force interceptor designed to climb fast and kill high-altitude bombers. It could reach Mach 2.8 in level flight and could zoom climb to nearly 80,000 feet in a kamikaze intercept profile. But by the time the Foxbats reached 70,000 feet, their engines screaming in protest, the Blackbird was already gone. Rashid watched the radar contact disappear off the eastern edge of the screen, crossing into Iranian airspace in seconds. 11 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how long the American reconnaissance jet had spent over Iraq. Less than 12 minutes, and it had seen everything. "Log the contact," Rashid said, his voice hollow. "Confirm identity as State Route 71. Note that interception was attempted but unsuccessful." He returned to his command chair and lit a cigarette with shaking hands. The younger operators were whispering among themselves, their confidence shaken. They'd spent years training to defend Iraqi airspace, building a formidable network of radars and missiles and interceptors. And in less than 12 minutes, an American pilot had flown through it like it didn't exist. "Colonel," Fard said quietly, "if they can do this whenever they want, then we can't stop them," Rashid finished. "We can only watch." The intelligence haul from Callahan State Route 71 flight was staggering. In the Air Operations Center Secure Imagery Analysis Facility, dozens of analysts pored over the reconnaissance photographs. The Blackbird's cameras had captured the entire breadth of Iraq in crystalline detail. Military convoys moving south toward Kuwait, Republican Guard divisions dug into defensive positions, Scud missile launchers hidden in residential neighborhoods, communications nodes buried under hardened shelters. "This is incredible," breathed Lieutenant Colonel Brad Stevens, Chief Imagery Analyst for Central Command. "We can see individual soldiers. We can count tanks. We can identify specific vehicle types." Major Sarah Chun, who'd flown in from Beale to oversee the reconnaissance missions, studied the photographs with clinical precision. "The Iraqis know we're watching them now," she said. "They tracked the Blackbird on radar. They scrambled interceptors. They know they can't touch it, but they know it's there." "Psychological warfare," said General Charles Horner, commander of Coalition Air Forces, entering the analysis center. "How did the mission go?" "Flawless, sir," Chun reported. "Major Callahan penetrated Iraqi airspace at 0130 local time, flew the entire planned route without incident, and exited into Turkish airspace 11 minutes later. The Iraqis attempted an intercept with MiG-25s, but they never came within 20,000 feet of our aircraft." Horner studied the photographs spread across the analysis table. "And they know they can't stop it." "Yes, sir." "Good," Horner said, "because now we're going to use that." Captain Daniel Kovac sat in the operations briefing room, exhausted. He'd just returned from his 4th mission over Iraq in 2 weeks, 4 long flights at 73,000 feet, each one lasting more than 8 hours in the cramped coffin of the U-2's cockpit, wearing a pressure suit that felt like being trapped inside a rigid balloon. But the missions were working. "We're seeing a pattern," said Major Chun, pointing to a sequence of satellite and U-2 photographs projected on the wall. "Every time we fly a U-2 mission, Iraqi mobile SAM batteries reposition. They're trying to predict our flight paths, concentrating their defenses in areas where they think we'll overfly, which means they're ignoring other areas," Kovac said, understanding immediately. "Exactly," Chin confirmed. "We've been using the U-2 to shape Iraqi defensive posture. When we want them to concentrate forces in the south, we fly southern routes. When we want them looking north, we shift our coverage pattern. They're reacting to us, which means we're controlling the battlefield." It was elegant in its simplicity. The U-2 was slow enough, visible enough on radar, that the Iraqis could track it. They couldn't shoot it down, but they could see it coming. And because they could see it, They responded to it, which meant that American war planners could manipulate Iraqi defenses simply by choosing where to fly reconnaissance missions. But there's a problem, Chin continued. The Iraqis are learning. They're getting smarter about how they respond. Some of their units are staying hidden even when we overfly them. They're starting to understand that we're using the U-2 as a deception tool. Kovacs frowned. So what do we do? Chin smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. We send the Blackbird. General Ayed al-Rawi, commander of the Republican Guard's Hammurabi Division, sat in the underground command bunker reviewing intelligence reports. The Americans have been flying reconnaissance missions every day for 3 weeks, and his analysts have begun to identify patterns. The U-2 flights typically occur during daylight hours, reported his intelligence officer, Major Hassan. They favor north-south routes along the Tigris and Euphrates River valleys. Flight altitude is consistent at 70 to 73,000 feet. We believe they're using optical cameras and signals intelligence packages. Can we shoot them down? Al-Rawi asked. No, General, Hassan admitted. The aircraft flies above our engagement envelope. The best we can do is track them and attempt to conceal our forces when we detect an overflight. Al-Rawi studied the map on the table before him, showing coalition air activity over the past 72 hours. The Americans were systematically destroying Iraq's military infrastructure, power plants, communications nodes, airfields, command bunkers. And they were doing it with impunity because they knew exactly where everything was. What about the fast one? Al-Rawi asked quietly. The one that came 2 weeks ago. Hassan's expression darkened. The state Route 71. We've only detected it once since the war began. It flew at 85,000 feet at Mach 3. Our Fox-Bats couldn't intercept. Our missiles couldn't engage. It was over Iraqi airspace for 11 minutes and then vanished. And if it comes back, then we watch it fly away, Hassan said bitterly, just like before. But the Blackbird didn't come back. Not for days. Not for weeks. Instead, the U-2 flights continued. Predictable, trackable, visible. The Iraqis adapted their tactics, learning to hide when American reconnaissance flew overhead, dispersing forces, using decoys and camouflage. It became a game of cat and mouse, played at 70,000 feet. And then, on February 18th, everything changed. Major Callahan stood before the state Route 71 again, but this time the mission brief was different. The Iraqis have adapted, Lieutenant Colonel Morse explained, showing him satellite imagery of suspected Scud missile sites in western Iraq. They've learned to hide from the U-2. They wait until after our reconnaissance flights pass. Then they move their mobile launchers into position and fire at Israel. By the time we detect the launcher has already relocated. So you want me to find them? Callahan said. I want you to surprise them, Morse corrected. The Iraqis think they know our reconnaissance pattern now. They track U-2 flights. They predict where we'll look and when. They've never seen the Blackbird operate in a tactical environment. They think it's strategic reconnaissance, only one quick pass, in and out. But you want me to do something different. Morse nodded. Multiple passes. Rapid repositioning. You'll hit 3 different target areas in western Iraq within a 20-minute window. The Iraqis won't know what's happening. Their air defense network is designed to track single aircraft on predictable routes. You're going to fly an unpredictable route at speeds they can't process. Callahan studied the mission profile. It was insane. The state Route 71 wasn't designed for tactical maneuvering. It was a strategic reconnaissance platform, pointed in a direction, light the afterburners, and photograph everything along a straight line. But what Morse was proposing was different. High-speed turns, rapid altitude changes, multiple target passes. Can the aircraft handle it? Callahan asked. The engineers say yes, Morse replied. The question is whether you can. Callahan pushed the throttles forward, and the state Route 71 leaped into the sky like a demon escaping hell. The Blackbird accelerated through Mach 1 at 45,000 feet, the sonic boom rolling across the desert below like thunder from a clear sky. By the time Iraqi radar operators detected the contact, Callahan was already at Mach 2.5 and climbing through 75,000 feet. Home plate, Habu 1-1. Entering hostile airspace, Callahan transmitted over the encrypted satellite link. His call sign, Abu, after the venomous pit viper that lived in Okinawa where SR-71s had once been based. Felt appropriate. Copy, Habu 1-1. We have you on track. First target area in 90 seconds. Callahan's heads-up display showed the desert landscape 60,000 feet below, rendered in infrared and synthetic aperture radar imagery. The SR-71 sensors could see through darkness, through clouds, through camouflage, and what they saw was invisible to the human eye, but crystal clear to the machines. Mobile Scud launchers. 3 of them, positioned in a wadi 30 miles west of Ramadi, hidden under camouflage netting and surrounded by decoy vehicles. The Iraqi crews had no idea they'd been found. The SR-71's cameras captured everything in less than 5 seconds. Then Callahan banked the aircraft. Not a gentle turn, but 4G pull that made the titanium airframe groan. The Blackbird carved across the night sky, repositioning for the second target area 40 miles to the north. In the Iraqi Air Defense Command Center in Baghdad, chaos erupted. Contact bearing 285, altitude 82,000 feet, speed Mach 3.1. Negative. Contact is now bearing 310, same altitude, accelerating to Mach 3.3. How can it be in 2 places at once? It's not 2 contacts. It's the same aircraft. It's maneuvering. Colonel Rashid Al-Takridi stared at the radar screens in disbelief. The state Route 71 was supposed to fly straight lines. That was the whole point of the aircraft. Go so fast that even if the enemy saw you coming, they couldn't do anything about it. But this one was turning, banking, repositioning at speeds that should have torn any aircraft apart. Scramble everything, Rashid ordered. MiGs, SAMs, everything. I don't care they can't catch it. Make them work for it. But by the time the orders went out, Callahan had already photographed 2 more Scud sites and was accelerating toward the Syrian border, leaving Iraqi airspace at Mach 3.4. 22 minutes. 3 targets. 0 interceptors within 40,000 feet. The intelligence from Callahan's mission arrived within hours. 3 Scud launcher sites, precisely located, photographed in detail. Within 6 hours, F-15E Strike Eagles had destroyed all 3 sites with laser-guided bombs. The Iraqis never saw it coming, General Horner said, reviewing the bomb damage assessment. They thought they were safe. They thought they'd learned our patterns. Major Chin nodded. The state Route 71 changes everything. The Iraqis can't predict it. They can't track it effectively. And they definitely can't stop it. How many more missions can we fly? As many as we need, Chin said. The aircraft is performing flawlessly. The pilots are confident. And the Iraqis are terrified. Horner smiled grimly. Good. Because I want them to know that anywhere they hide, anytime they move, we can see them. I want them to understand that they don't control their own airspace anymore. We do. It was a psychological turning point. For weeks, the Iraqi military had been adapting, learning, evolving its tactics to counter American reconnaissance. But the SR-71's tactical employment shattered that adaptation. No matter how clever the Iraqis became, no matter how well they hid, the Blackbird could find them. And by the time they realized they'd been spotted, it was already too late. Captain Daniel Kovacs sat alone in the pilot's lounge, staring at a photograph he'd taken 3 days earlier from 73,000 feet above Basra. The image showed a section of Highway 80, the road connecting Kuwait City to Basra, Iraq. Except it wasn't a road anymore. It was a graveyard. Thousands of vehicles, military trucks, civilian cars, stolen Kuwaiti buses, stretched along the highway in a charred, twisted line of destruction. Coalition aircraft had caught the convoy retreating from Kuwait and annihilated it in what would later be called the Highway of Death. Kovacs had photographed it all. Every burned-out hull. Every body lying in the sand. You okay? Asked Major Chun, entering the lounge quietly. Kovacs didn't look up from the photograph. We won, he said flatly. The war's basically over. The Iraqis are retreating. We're about to declare a ceasefire. That's right. So why does this feel wrong? Chin sat down beside him, studying the photograph. She'd seen dozens like it over the past 6 weeks. The clinical, black and white evidence of what modern warfare looked like from 70,000 feet. Clean, precise, utterly devastating. Because you're not just a pilot, Chin said quietly. You're a witness. Kovacs finally looked at her. We photographed everything. Every target. Every strike. Every convoy. We gave them nowhere to hide. And when they tried to run, we killed them by the thousands. That's war, Chin said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Kovacs asked. Or is it something else? Something we don't have a word for yet. Chin didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. Baghdad, Iraq / Iraqi Air Defense Command / March 17th, 1991 / 1,400 hours. Colonel Rashid Al-Takriti stood in the ruins of the command center. A Tomahawk cruise missile had struck the building 2 weeks earlier, collapsing the eastern wing and killing 11 operators. The survivors had moved to a backup facility in a bunker beneath the Ministry of Defense, but it didn't matter anymore. The war was over. Iraq had lost. Colonel, said Captain Fard, approaching with a folder of documents. The Americans are demanding access to our air defense records. They want to know how many times we detected their reconnaissance aircraft. Rashid laughed bitterly. Tell them we detected them every time. The U-2, the Blackbird, all of them. We saw them coming. We tracked them across our airspace. We even managed to lock fire control radar on the U-2 twice. But we never shot one down. No, Rashid said quietly. We never shot one down. He thought about the past 6 weeks, the endless nights watching radar screens, seeing American aircraft cross Iraqi airspace with impunity. The high-altitude reconnaissance jets had been bad enough, but they were just the beginning. F-117 stealth fighters that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Cruise missiles that flew lower than treetops. E-3 AWACS aircraft that saw everything, everywhere, all the time. Iraq had spent billions building an air defense network. French engineers. Soviet missiles. Redundant radar coverage. Hardened command bunkers. And none of it had mattered. The Americans had owned the sky from the first minute of the war to the last. What do we tell our superiors? Fard asked. Rashid looked at the younger officer. For a long moment, we tell them the truth. The Americans didn't just defeat our military. They made it irrelevant. They fought a war where we couldn't even see the enemy half the time. And the parts we could see. He gestured at the photograph of the highway of death on the wall. They made examples of them. Langley, Virginia / CIA headquarters / March 20th, 1991 / 1,000 hours. In a secure conference room, senior intelligence officials gathered to assess the strategic reconnaissance effort during Operation Desert Storm. The State Route 71 flew 9 combat missions over Iraq, reported Colonel Hargrove. 0 losses, 0 intercepts. Total time over hostile airspace, approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes. Intelligence collected, critical strategic infrastructure, mobile missile locations, troop movements, and electronic order of battle. And the U-2? Asked Director Gates. 47 combat missions, said another officer. 0 losses, multiple attempted intercepts, all unsuccessful. The U-2 provided persistent tactical reconnaissance, bomb damage assessment, and signals intelligence collection throughout the campaign. Gates nodded slowly. Gentlemen, what we've learned here is going to shape reconnaissance doctrine for the next 30 years. We proved that high-altitude platforms remain viable even in the age of advanced surface-to-air missiles. We demonstrated that speed and altitude still provide effective survivability. And perhaps most importantly, we showed that overhead reconnaissance remains essential to modern warfare. There's something else, Hargrove added, the psychological impact. The Iraqis knew we were watching them. They knew they couldn't stop us. That knowledge degraded their operational effectiveness as much as the actual bombing campaign. Total information dominance. Gates said, that's what we achieved. The Iraqis couldn't move couldn't hide, couldn't plan without us knowing about it. That's a powerful weapon. It's also a dangerous one, said a CIA analyst from the Director of Intelligence. When you can see everything, you start to believe you understand everything. We photographed every square mile of Iraq. We intercepted every radio transmission. We tracked every vehicle movement. And we still miss things. Like what? Gates asked. Like the fact that Saddam had already decided to retreat from Kuwait before we started the ground war. The analyst said, we saw the military picture perfectly, but we didn't understand the political picture at all. The room fell silent. Beale Air Force Base, California / pilot quarters / April 2nd, 1991 / 2,200 hours. Major Richard Callahan sat on the edge of his bed, still wearing his flight suit, staring at nothing. The State Route 71 would be retired again, officially this time, permanently. The aircraft had proven its worth in Desert Storm, but that didn't matter. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union was collapsing. The defense budget was shrinking, and the State Route 71 was expensive. $40,000 per flight hour, specialized fuel, unique maintenance requirements, pilot training costs that ran into millions. Satellites were cheaper. Satellites were predictable. Satellites didn't require heroes. You did good work out there, said Lieutenant Colonel Morse, appearing in the doorway. Did I? Callahan asked. We helped destroy an army. We photographed the death of thousands of people. And for what? So Kuwait could go back to being a monarchy? So oil prices would stabilize. Moore sat down beside him. You think too much. Someone has to, Callahan said. We built these aircraft to spy on the Soviet Union, to prevent World War III, to give us warning before nuclear missiles launched. That was the mission, prevent Armageddon. But this was just another Middle Eastern war, and we used Cold War surveillance technology to make it brutally efficient. War has always been brutal, Moore said, but not like this, Callahan insisted. Not this clinical, not this one-sided. The Iraqis never had a chance. We saw everything they did before they did it. We knew where they were going before they got there. It wasn't a war. It was a turkey shoot. Morse was quiet for a long moment. You think we should have let them shoot back effectively? I think we should question what we're becoming, Callahan said. We built a military that can see everything, strike anything, and kill anyone from a distance so great that we never had to look them in the eye. That's not strength. That's something else. What is it? Callahan met her eyes. I don't know yet, but I think we're going to find out. Baghdad, Iraq / March 2003 / 12 years later. The sky over Baghdad erupted in fire once again. This time, there were no SR-71s. The Blackbird had been permanently retired in 1998. Its last flight recorded. Its pilots scattered to other assignments. The U-2 still flew, older now, upgraded with modern sensors, but fundamentally unchanged. But the real work was done by satellites, by Global Hawks, by Predator drones that could loiter for hours and strike with Hellfire missiles. In an underground command center, an aging Colonel Rashid Al-Takriti watched radar screens that showed nothing. The Americans had learned from the First War. This time, they weren't just attacking military targets. They were attacking the entire Iraqi state apparatus. Shock and awe, they called it. Do we have any air defenses left? Asked a young lieutenant. Rashid shook his head. We never really had them. Not against this. He thought about that night in 1991 when he'd first seen the State Route 71 cross his radar screen. Impossible, invincible, untouchable. He'd spent 12 years thinking about that aircraft, wondering if there had been any way to stop it, any tactic they'd missed, any technology they could have deployed. But the answer was always the same. No, you can't shoot down what you can't see. You can't catch what you can't reach. And you can't win a war when your enemy owns the sky so completely that your own airspace becomes their surveillance platform. The Americans had proven that in 1991. They were proving it again now. And the lesson, Rashid knew, would echo for generations. Beale Air Force Base, California / U. 2 operations / March 21st, 2003. Captain Daniel Kovacs, now Lieutenant Colonel Kovacs, stood in the operations center, watching real-time video feeds from U-2s flying over Iraq. The aircraft was older now, but still viable, still necessary. Because despite all the satellites, despite all the drones, despite all the technology, sometimes you still needed a human being at 73,000 feet, watching the world below and making decisions that algorithms couldn't. "How many missions have you flown now?" asked a younger pilot, freshly qualified on the U-2. "Over Iraq?" Kovacs asked. 312. Counting Desert Storm, the no-fly zone enforcement, and now this. "That's insane." "That's the job," Kovacs said. "Someone has to watch." But as he stared at the video feeds, the explosions blooming across Baghdad, the military convoys fleeing north, the chaos and destruction unfolding in real time, he wondered who was watching the watchers. Who was questioning whether the power to see everything came with the wisdom to understand what you were looking at? Who was asking whether perfect surveillance led to perfect decisions or just perfectly executed mistakes? The State Route 71 was gone, retired to museums where tourists could marvel at its impossible speed and impossible altitude. But its legacy remained. The philosophy it represented, that absolute information dominance was the key to military victory, had become doctrine. And Kovacs wasn't sure that was a good thing. "Sir," the young pilot asked, "you okay?" Kovacs blinked, pulling himself back to the present. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Just thinking about ghosts." Outside, on the flight line, a U-2 spun up its engine and prepared for another mission. 73,000 feet, 8 hours of flight time, thousands of photographs, terabytes of signals intelligence, complete surveillance of enemy territory, the perfect eye in the sky, watching everything, understanding nothing,